The Creative Jungle podcast is all about speaking to and learning from inspiring entrepreneurs, creatives, and well-being experts. In each episode, we discuss their unconventional lives and journeys, what they've learned and how they've got to where they are now, any tips they can share with you so that you too may live a much more creative and happier life.
The podcast is brought to you by us, Dan and Sam. We're a couple who set up MYO and Creative Jungle Company, and we are all about helping people get creative and bringing a little bit more creativity to life and business. We host over 14 different arts and crafts workshops from our central London studio, virtually offsite at events and festivals. We have a range of creative kits, and we also run creative thinking workshops. So having helped thousands of people, we think we know a thing or two about helping people get creative and perhaps being a little bit happier. We hope to see you in the studio at some point soon too.
Be sure to subscribe so you can hear about future episodes. Right, let's get started. Here's the next episode.
Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest, Scott Leonard, who is a master in branding, storytelling, creative things, and everything you can imagine. He's had jobs in Zipcar as a creative director and working on their brand, has worked for Ogilvy, has supported startups with Virgin Startup on branding, and he's also ran his own agency called the Champion Agency for the last 9 years, which is a social enterprise that's all about championing change makers. And I've definitely fluffed that, and we'll be sure to ask Scott to talk a bit more about his journey. You can find out about the Champion Agency at the Champion Agency on Instagram and also thechampionagency.com. So welcome, Scott.
Great. Thanks for having me.
No worries.
It's a
Pleasure. We've had a really nice conversation just before we started to click record.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess what we'd really like to start off with is for you to tell us a bit about your journey and all the bits that I missed. I guess a little bit from what you studied to what you're doing now, just to give a bit of context to everybody listening.
Cool. So my creative journey started out when I was young. I think I was really into the visuals and aesthetics. I guess I was brought up in the 80s, which was when sort of neon and day glows and pop culture became kind of cool culture. And it really inspired me to start looking at the aesthetics of life and how we lead our lives. I was also lucky enough to be brought up in the north of England. So when I was growing up and realizing creativity and what creativity was around me, we had Manchester, we had Hacienda, we had the boom of music. Nice. We had club culture that was taking off. We had a rave scene. You can see some books behind me, sort of rave scenes. So this whole world was kind of exploding. We've gone from new romantics through to rave, and then we're moving on to, the Hacienda and Ben Kelly design and kind of the whole Manchester scene. So I was inspired by that. Of my family, I'm the first to even consider higher education, and I was the first to gain a degree. And what was great about that, I guess, entire process was it was kind of pioneering new routes. And although I didn't have much to look toward within certainly the context of family, it kind of allowed me to pave my own way. And I wasn't following anybody else's footsteps. So it was kind of free in that sense. I remember at 17, the big clincher for me was I entered ID magazine, which was this new hot, trendy, cool magazine, had a competition to design a poster. And I think I got runner-up or third place, but it was this little lad from Bradford had a position in the world, and ID had recognized it and recognized my creativity. So I guess that was probably the most important creative award I ever received, because suddenly ID magazine had put my little name in their little column in this poster competition. Wow. So after that, I thought maybe there's a career in this. Maybe I could do something with this. And I quickly started thinking about life after A-levels, which were the sort of hot thing at the time. And I went on to do a foundation course, and on the back of the foundation course, then went on to study graphic design and communication at Bath College of Art. So I'd left Bradford, I went to Bath. I was completely in a strange new world, studying graphic design and communication, and it opened up my world. So first design commission was at 16. and then on the back of that, the 17, there was the ID Poster Awards.
Wow.
And then we go to study graphic design, and then I guess that's kind of where we were.
So you knew, it sounds like you almost knew from very early on that design and graphic design it's in your blood. That's what you were going to do.
I think so. Yeah. I wonder where it all comes from, but we don't know. I guess let's just blame it on the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
I've recently listened to the podcast about Joy Division called Transmissions, which charts that whole journey. It's
Sounds like
such an amazing time to be alive, and
yeah.
in your adult or late teens.
Yeah, and your graphic design and communication. I actually saw it called Design, Communications, and Creativity. Is that what
Yeah.
It's so what an ominous title.
It's so broad. I mean, it could almost be anything. And really what it meant was, it was kind of like, it talked a lot about semiotics. It talked a lot about visualization and how we look at things and how we make decisions. It's very closely associated with art, which is kind of doing somewhat similar things.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing I really got or didn't get from the course, and I think this was kind of part of the reason for my journey and the way it's taken the sort of systematic scenarios that it did was to make something look good is kind of easy. To make something impressive is kind of easy, but to give it purpose and to give it context
and emotion,
and make it creatively whole, I think is what I've been fascinated throughout sort of my entire career. And even doing the degree, I realized I was just learning how to make bad ideas look good, or not really questioning the integrity of the idea, the actual creativity that went into the process and the making of that idea and that context. So I embarked on a D&AD course, so Designers and Art Directors course, and it was in London whilst I was doing my degree course, because I wasn't really getting enough from the degree course. So each week it started out as a competitive brief. You had to submit an answer to a competitive brief, and each term they took on, I'm pretty sure it was like 30 students. And I remember one year there was 300 and something applied, one of the terms, and I was lucky enough to make it in the 30 that got through into the competitive brief. And so what it did is each week you came to another advertising agency, you put your work on a wall, and it would get torn to shreds, and then you would then go back and come back the next week and come back the next week, answering different briefs. And I think, to your point about creativity, it forced you to be creative and to be resilient and to think about, what am I doing next? And more and more and more ideas needed. And so you never landed on one idea, and you never got comfortable with one idea, because you realized there was so many more needed in order to creatively overcome whatever the challenge was.
So were you it was put up and you were given feedback, critical feedback, it sounds like.
Yeah, hopefully positive. Yeah.
Did you have to rework it, or that was that, and then you had to come back with a new brief, new submission?
Yeah. So each week you'd come back with a new, so the agency would then set a brief and you would have to answer that, and the next agency would then critique basically what you'd produced. But putting the work on the wall was a really rigorous process, especially in a big agency. So suddenly, again, you got this kind of this little kid from Bath College who's traveling to London on a Tuesday night to put some work on a wall to get it torn apart, to then get back on a train and get back after midnight, but with the knowledge that we got a little bit better that week, or a little bit better that week, or we've grown a little bit in stature that week.
Gosh, that resilience.
I think creativity is so much about resilience and having the ability of, and I guess to some degree self-belief, that you can walk through this creative wilderness and you will find water, you will find an outcome, you will find, salvation and kind of whatever you need at the end, and you will make it through that wilderness. And knowing that you'll do that day in, day out is, I guess, why we do what we do, because we love it.
Absolutely.
And I guess the pressure helped a lot, because it was like a weekly, imagine you're given 6 months for a brief versus a week, like you really get your brain going, and you kind of, the pressure can be good, I guess, in the constraints of the brief. Did you find that? And it kind of gave you confidence over time?
Most definitely. And it's a tight framework. The other thing I did when I was at college, which I guess, again, built on that notion of deadline, was the Big Issue was doing really well. And whenever I came to London, I always bought a copy of the Big Issue. But the problem was, when the Big Issue was sold, let's say in Bath, where I was at, it had no relevance, because the stories were all London-centric. So what was needed was a conversation that was more specific or local to Avon and Somerset, or Bath in this context.
Yeah.
So I volunteered to be the art editor on The Big Issue, taking it outside of London. And that was even tighter a time frame, because we'd start on Friday night. We would basically put a magazine together and we'd go to print on Sunday night. And that was super intense, because you had to it was only 36 pages or 42, or it was kind of like a supplement that covered the Big Issue itself. But to start on Friday night, knowing Sunday was your deadline, and knowing you had to live life in between all that and probably go out, I don't know, have some fun amongst all that, meant that the deadline was really tight. And it was a really smart and refreshing way of kind of focusing in on what you had to do and making sure you delivered every single time. And you did your best, but also you weren't too precious, because you knew that next time you could do it slightly differently, or you could better or improve a situation or a system.
Yeah.
Wow. So it sounds like just in your youth, you just brought the pressure on to really test yourself
and push yourself.
Yeah, because I can imagine it's not like now where you could whip something up a bit quicker with some savvy software. Like back in the 80s and 90s, it was a lot more difficult.
Manual?
Like,
yeah.
I don't like. Did you even use Adobe Illustrator? Or how did you actually pull stuff together back then?
So I'm not that old that we were relying on Paste Up. It was called Paste Up, but I did learn as a kid. I remember going work experience where you physically took pieces and stuck them onto acetate, and the acetate's what would have made a plate up, and the plate is what would have gone to print.
Wow.
So we moved away slightly from that, and we got onto computers. But the computer at the time was, I think it was a Mac LC2. So the screen would have been, I guess, would have been the sort of like 11-inch. It's a very small system. It's a very small machine, and Photoshop didn't exist. It was freehand and Quark, and they were kind of like revolutionary new tools to get your head around. Adobe had not really come into the frame, I think, at this point. I don't even know if Adobe existed. So it was kind of very basic, but also kind of refreshing that you could do these things on computers, so you could edit and move things around. But also that meant that you had to scan things, and you had to take the time to organize and work out what a process would have been. So you could create a piece of artwork, but it needed scanning in. Where was the scanner? Did you have access to a scanner? Did you need to go to a specialist scanning place, for example? Yeah. So the process, it had to be much more chronological. It's not, and mobile phones didn't exist in those days either. So we have to bear that in mind, that you have to make phone calls via landlines. Landlines relied on people being in. If you're working Saturdays and Sundays, was the office open? Could you get in touch with people? So I guess it was all good learning at the time, and kind of, it was all good training for a creative, I guess, journey that's not prescribed, it's not fixed, and it's not known. And I think that's essentially the beauty of creativity, that it was preparing me for this unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the things that have really stuck out to me in your creative journey and how you define being creative is, how you define creativity is, not only does it look good, but it says something, has a core meaning, a message in what it is that you're presenting. So that kind of wholeness of it, the aspect about resilience, and just kind of being able to put bravery to put it up on a wall and have everybody look at it and read it and absorb it and pull it apart if they want to, and then the resilience to bear that and move on and keep creating. And I think the last thing that really stood out is that kind of detachment, maybe not being so attached to it, and you're like, this is my one baby and I'm so precious about it. Sounds like actually you have to be able to put that aside or let that go and again move on, which I don't think I've ever quite heard, but yeah, I'll definitely take that on board myself, because it's so easy to think, oh, I've come up with this idea, of put so much heart and sweat and blood into it and it's my one, and then actually then it doesn't land, and then you feel maybe you almost get yourself stuck in that one way of thinking.
Totally agree. And I think if you do believe that's it and that's the best, then you should stop.
Yeah.
Because if you think that was it, then we just go home. That's it. We're done.
We're done. Yeah. There's no more.
yeah, we're done. And I think I guess that's what keeps us all creative, is the notion that there's a better something out there, because everything's changing in constant flux around us. That today is different to yesterday, naturally. The conditions that we make, what we make is different to what we've done before, because we've got more experience, we've got more understanding, we've got more inspiration, we've got, we might have more sunshine. The way we feel is completely different. And then finally, the one thing that has changed and will always change, and I think I referenced it a little bit with the computers and mobile phones, is technology. So I remember working at an agency in the Netherlands, and it's really hot. They're a very hot tech company. Said, we are going to do meetings where we can see each other in real time, and you can touch something and I can see what you're touching on your screen. Now, we're doing this over Zoom, and we take it for granted. And it's not even so much as even taking it for granted, but we expect our grandparents to be able to do this too, right? So if you think about this hot tech company kind of go, wow, we've got this thing where you can edit in real time. We can do this, and our grandparents can do this. So it's not even a unique piece of technology today, it's a given. And I think that's the one thing that changes with our lives is technology.
Yeah.
And the ability and freedom that brings you is something that, as a creative, we have to embrace, because it gives us possibilities that we could never have, and those that came before us would have never even dreamed of.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. And just going back to the original question as well, just in terms of the journey. So I kind of finished, studied it, really put yourself out there. Started doing the big issue outside London. What's been, I guess, a couple of the things since then, kind of leading up to the Champion Agency?
Yeah.
And maybe speak a little bit about the Champion Agency also, and the purpose behind it.
So on the back of that, I came to London, unemployed, and you come to London and there's a horrible scenario, and this bottleneck is still being talked about. It was referred to only yesterday in Campaign, which is the advertising industry's sort of newspaper. The bottleneck is trying to get into a business without any formal training, and you're trying to impress people who are desperately trying to cling onto their jobs, and trying to keep young people and essentially hungry, passionate young people out. And you've got to produce a book, a portfolio that's relevant and fits contemporary models of thinking, but also contemporary technology. So it needs to be, for example, in modern times, young people's books have got to take on board technology, the possibility of an integrated campaign, etc. Whereas when I was starting out, it was more traditional media, so posters, billboards, radio, TV ads, etc. So I spent 6 months putting a portfolio together, and I remember having to go to the job centre each week to basically show them what I'd been doing. And I remember going, and there was one scenario where the person sat opposite said, so you're telling me you've taken your portfolio to 32 agencies this week and none of them give you a job? And I'm like, yeah, I did that, yeah. And so you make 4 books, you draw them, because photocopying was 10p a copy. It was quite expensive in those days. So you make 4 portfolios, you give out 4 portfolios, and you'd pick them up at lunchtime, take them to the next agency, they'd look at it, pick it up, take it to the next agency.
Wow.
So you had kind of 32 agencies looking at your portfolio. I found a partner at the time, so he did the words, I did the pictures, or I think I did the pictures, he did the words, or something like that. And anyway, so they can't believe you've had 32 punts at a job and not got a job. And again, this resilience thing comes into play. 6 months down the line, we're then offered 2 places out of the blue. We'd made a big play for both of them, and one was called Mother and the other was called St. Luke's, and both were in the infancy. Both were sort of like 6 months going startups. And I remember Mother saying, like, if you come with us, we can't guarantee you'll have a job in 6 months, but it'll be fun. Yeah. And then St. Luke's had been going about a year, and St. Luke's were a registered social enterprise, so they had purpose, and I could see sort of great value in that relationship too. But we chose Mother, and we were the first creative hirings at Mother other than the partners. So it was that direction. There were 7 of us, including the cleaner. And I remember it was 5 pitches in 5 weeks with 5 wins. And then you got an agency. Suddenly you're looking at this like amazing scenario where you've got 5 great clients who really kind of want to work together. But what I saw for the first time was the beginning of an agency. And I saw how teamwork, purpose, the purpose was to be modern popularist. We didn't want to be clever. We didn't want to be too smart. To be modern popularist is to be Coronation Street. It's to be Peter Kay. It's to do something that we can all share. It's sort of inclusive and accessible. In those days, and I'm applying today's words to what we were trying to do in those days. And it kind of opened up this amazing narrative between an audience, which was essentially a customer, and a brand. And you could do things that were a bit silly, that were a bit wacky, and a bit I'm going to say it again, Coronation Street, because we like Coronation Street, and kind of had some kind of value. And so that began this journey. And after a couple of years of that, I was left to go to work at another agency, and then got headhunted out to the Netherlands. Did 3 years in the Netherlands, working for Wine and Kennedy, Schaefer Van Schaas, and then came back to St. Luke's, which picked up that conversation which had started 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow.
On the back of that, more agencies. Karmarama was one that sort of, in its infancy, helped, again, sort of worked with a team there. We did this thing called Make Tea Not War. And it was a really sort of, it sounds like a really basic thing, but we put this idea together. It was the Anti-War Coalition. And I kind of got involved in this and saw that if I made a poster, I wrote the line that said Make Tea Not War. And it was art directed by the creative director of Karmarama called Dave Bonaguidi. So he did the pictures, I did the words, and then I took it to the march. And I remember putting this poster and giving it out to people, and giving the placards out to people. And we were walking down Whitehall, and everybody started shouting, Make Tea Not War, Make Tea Not War.
Wow.
And they're saying, singing this line that you'd written in your bedroom, in that case, my bedroom. And suddenly, you hear what you'd written, and it takes on this new sort of mantle of importance. And it was really kind of clear for me at this point, where it was like, hang on a second, this has got power. This is capturing the people's voices, and they are shouting it to our leaders. In this case, it's Tony Blair at the time. So you've got the whole of Whitehall shouting, Make Tea Not War, Make Tea Not War. And then the next day, I remember going to newsagents, and I'm pretty sure it was featured in 23 nationals, and it got 7 front covers.
Wow.
And this is like another level of communication. This is not, I'm not flogging noodles or some kind of fizzy pop or yogurt or cars or kind of TV, shows. Yeah. I was actually flogging essentially what I believed, but also what everybody else believed, because they could see value in this. And this kind of opened up this thinking process of using a creative skill for good. And that's not the first time anyone's ever done that. And hopefully it will continue. You can see all the books behind me. There's so much reference of people using creativity for good. And I think that was kind of where the seeding of this idea, this agency that actually existed to do more good in the world and to help elevate people who are trying to create change, to give them the creative tools and the creative foundations that they could build from to do great things and to achieve more change in the world. So that was kind of the beginnings of that. On the back of that, I ended up working at Ogilvy & Mather, and after about 2.5 years, I realized I'd reached the ceiling. And wow. It was a really awkward scenario, because I was young. I was 30, I think I was 35, but I had to tell everybody I was nearly 40, because the people I was responsible for managing were in their 50s, and they didn't like this cocky, jumped up kid telling them what to do. And it was like I was kind of not being myself. I was operating in a world that wasn't healthy. And I'd seen so many shady things take place. I remember working on a pitch for 6 months, huge pitch. I was responsible for 5 offices across Europe. So I was going to Europe pretty much on the road most of the week.
Wow.
And then you come in, and then we were pitched. It was a very large bank. I'm not going to say which bank it was, but it's a super large European bank. We won the pitch. And then what happened was the CEO of the parent company of all of the agencies that worked on the pitch said to the CEO of the bank, if you choose this other agency, I know you want to point it to these guys and that you've basically told them that they've won, but if you give it to my other agency, I'll knock off 10%. And it's better for them, and you'll get better work. And that's what happened. So I'd invested 6 months of life.
Yeah.
We did this great work. We'd won the pitch, and then it was awarded to another agency within the group because 2 CEOs had basically struck a deal. And this is nothing to do with creativity. You've not thought about what the work was, or the value of this creativity, and the creativity being stripped of any value, and it become a commodity. And I think
you begin to feel just like a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
And that was your final stroll.
Yeah, and I think that point I'm out. I need to get out of this. I need to figure out a way.
Yeah.
And even looking back, the strategy was very simple. It was let your worry take care of your money problems. And it was this notion of human worry and anxiety solving your money problems, which it's the worst thing a bank could ever say, because it's direct opposite of what a bank does. It wants to keep you anxious. It wants to keep you tense. It wants to keep you on tenterhook. But you could see the purpose thing kind of coming through there. So on the back of that, we started courting small businesses that were making change. And one of those was Streetcar. I was fascinated by this idea of a car club, which I'd been involved in car clubs since the Netherlands, which is, I guess, my background in the Netherlands. I was always in car clubs, renting cars, picking up vehicles. Seemed like a natural thing. Then it came to the UK, Streetcar, and the agency again kind of went in with, for want of better words, kind of big boy. We're the big agent. Retainer. We will give you X amounts of hours per month for that retainer. And the client kept saying, what am I going to get from it? What's the value in this exchange? Well, you get 4 hours this person, 10 hours that person, and 4 hours that. And it doesn't really make sense. It's like, from a client's perspective, they're like, well, I just want to get more people to join this club, to get more people to get involved in this process. Well, we can give you 4 hours here and 8 hours this. And it just didn't make sense. So luckily, the connection was there between I and the CEOs. And they simply said, look, we can't afford the agency. We're just about to sign a deal with Zipcar. Would you jump ship, sack all that to come and lead the business? And from a brand perspective, so basically coming as a brand director of Streetcar, transitioning it through to Zipcar, and then taking Zipcar to IPO float, which was like a monumental sort of task. But I needed a way out, and I needed a step that wasn't back, and I didn't want to go back into ad land, because I could see not only was it kind of not the environment that I wanted to be in, but it would pretty much sell everything, including creativity, to satisfy a commercial need, and it kind of lost itself, for want of a better word. I didn't want to go down the plug hole with the industry that had lost itself. So I went to Streetcar. And what was amazing about this piece of training, certainly for leading on to champions, I was responsible for 23 under 25-year-olds.
Wow!
Again, the old guy.
That must have been nuts. You go from the jumpy upstart, I guess, in an old school environment, to having many jumpy upstart.
And I'm suddenly the old guy now. I'm having to cut my age down again instead of going up. I'm kind of pretending I'm kind of young and cool and everything. What was really interesting about that was when you've got a team that essentially they've got lots of energy and they're very bright and very sharp, but they just needed clear leadership and clear path that they could execute and work to. And that was kind of, in many ways, it was a simple task, because the energy was there, the motivation was there. Everyone was there because they wanted to make the world a better place and get more people to drive cars. What we could do and what we did in that 18 months of that transition phase was kind of phenomenal from a creative perspective. That it was everything I dreamed of whilst working the bigger agencies, and it unleashed, I guess, a level of creativity that I'd not seen before. Primarily because you're working with people that were just not trained as creatives; they were untrained, and they were young and energetic. And the great thing about young and energetic is you fail, you kind of mess up, but you'll come back. You'll come back. And this resilience is there. Failure and resilience are so key and so integral to being a successful creative. You've got to keep pushing what is sometimes wrong in order to find what is right, and you've got to keep moving in that direction. So we were allowed, and we were given sort of carte blanche opportunity from the management to take this brand to the next level. Nice. So we were doing things that were kind of, in its time, it sounds a bit silly, but it was, I guess, pioneering new routes. So I remember, for example, we, in order to demonstrate where the cars could go, we literally got in cars with a group of, they were models or upstarting models, and we'd say, right, where do you want to drive today? What would be your dream trip? and it'd say Brighton. So we just drive to Brighton and we'd film them in Brighton in a car and just say, blah, blah, drive to Brighton in a Zipcar. You should drive to wherever you want to go. It's over to you. But then what we also realized was the commercial value of this. So when we came to reaching out to Big Yellow Storage, I remember they were a big client because lots of people said we use our Zipcars or street cars to go to pick stuff up and then take it home.
Yeah.
So we said, look, if you want to be in an ad, you can feature in one of the ads that's going to feature on all the tubes, but we'll charge you $5,000. So they were like, $5,000, that's a bargain. So we basically got the client, as in the client or the customer of Streetcar at this point, to feature in the ads and pay to feature in the ads. So they paid for all the production, they paid for the shoot.
Amazing.
And they
would, so product placement in a movie almost.
Product placement in the ad,
And that was paying for the creativity. So that means we could take punts on photographers, so we could get young upstart photographers in because we could afford to basically make mistakes. And it opened up this creative narrative that just kind of, everyone's like, well, so why can't we do it like this? Well, we should charge more. If you want to be in our ads, you pay. Now, the concept of making ads and charging people to be in your ads is kind of a bit wild from an advertising perspective, but it seems like a sharp thing to do. And we did also, I'm just pull this one out here. We did this one so we actually used, I hope you can see it.
The tea bag for anyone listening. Kettle on, street van, driving from $8.95 per hour.
Nice.
So you give them out to people, did you? Kind of hand them out for people on the tube?
Builders merchants. No, we gave these out to builders merchants, and there's tea bags inside it. So you can give a builder a cup of tea, and they could, whilst doing that, think, what street van? What's that? What, $8.95 an hour? I'll just book it for an hour. Great. I need it for 2 hours to shift some gear from X to X. Yeah. So suddenly you're using tea bags as a medium, and then you're also charging people to be in your ads. And this is like, wow, this is how advertising should be.
Like a win-win-win.
Right. Circular scenario which everyone benefits from. I guess on the back of that, the purpose thing became quite evident that you can do it, you can commercialize this, and it can work. So I quit. We then took Zipcar up to IPO Flow. That went very well, and then on the back of that, I got involved in Google, setting up the Google Digital Experts program. And what was kind of wonderful about the Google Digital Experts program was that they were taking people from disadvantaged and underrepresented backgrounds and training them in the art of digital marketing. Yeah. And what was so fascinating about that was I knew going into this classroom environment, there were 12 kids in the classroom, and I agreed to mentor the first series, or the first sort of series of the program. Two had actually done time in Her Majesty's Pleasure. So I'm walking into this room and I'm thinking, right, who's done time? Who's done time? I'm looking around the room trying to work out who'd been the naughty one or naughty two in the group. And after 5 minutes, I didn't want to know. And after 10 minutes, I really didn't want to know. And to this day, I still don't know. And I think that was what was so magical about that learning experience for me, was I'd stopped any sort of preconception or judging on face value, and I just accepted that these are just really bright, sparky creatives. I just want to help these bright, sparky creatives be more creative, be better, and to grow in new ways. And so what was really refreshing about that was all preconceptions had kind of fallen away. I'd managed to mobilize 23 under 25-year-olds, and now I was looking at even younger. These were like 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And some had come from really tough backgrounds. They'd done a little bit of time at Her Majesty's Pleasure, and they were still pushing, they were still resilient, and they could see the value in all of this. And each session, I remember putting up 10 heroes that got out of bed and made a difference. And there were all these wonderful heroes. And every time you put one up, I remember Richard Branson specifically, somebody said, yeah, well, he came from money, he was minted. Okay, yeah, okay. And then there was Marie Claire, yeah, but she came from, okay. So we couldn't kind of argue with those. The one that always got everybody was this chap called Philippe Crozier. And it was a French guy he was limbless, and he just swam the channel.
Oh, wow.
He fashioned arms and legs, creatively fashioned arms and legs, like flippers, almost like little flippers. And he swam the channel, and he started swimming, and it's supposed to be 21 miles, but the currents got him, and given his stature's quite small, it dragged him around. So he ended up doing 38 miles.
Wow.
And no kid in the room could argue with Philip Crozier. So Philip Crozier, this little character with these amazing creatively designed arms and legs became the hero of the class, and that set everybody's thinking off. And it was wonderful to see that program. It was a 6-week program, and the outcome was these really bright, sparky young folk that could think about things in different ways. They were inspiring me. And then I thought, right, so we can take an agency of young people. How can we turn that into something that's got commercial value? And then how can we take that forward as a possible idea? And it was quite obvious that we were never going to be just a commercial agency. We had to have an accreditation of some ethical degree or some sort of social context. So we became a registered social enterprise from day one.
Nice.
And what that meant is that we specifically give away and reinvest 50% of all our profits back in the business. We've done that throughout. And the way that's manifested itself for the last couple of years is an annual scholarship program. So one kid, we pay for the entire scholarship and living bursary and equipment bursary for them to go through college.
Wow. And
Very
to
cool.
study graphic design.
Yeah, design and communication, but they come out industry ready. So they're fully
Nice.
trained. So yeah, it's kind of like a full circle.
That's a full circle
That must be so
experience.
nice. I guess there's
yeah.
quite a few now because you've been going for 9 years, so that must be really nice to see them
Yeah.
out in the wild because of the hard work you're doing and support
Yeah.
you've given.
And I mean, it's been fascinating just hearing this mad journey you've been on and all the different companies you've worked with and approached. I have 2 questions on branding before I move on. I'm asking this already half knowing the answer, but why is a brand so powerful, and what's the power behind storytelling? A, and then B, with that, what are some of your favorite brands that you just think, God, they're creative, they are absolutely mind-blowing?
Really good question. So we spent a lot of time running workshops around branding, and we always start the branding workshop by asking the same question, and usually it kind of falls. So the question goes, what's the most successful brand in the world ever? I ask you the same question. What's the most successful brand in the world ever?
I'd say Google.
I was going to say
And
McDonald's.
Apple and Coca-Cola. Those are the first 3 that came to my mind.
If I told you the answer was God,
Yes.
and if I told you we're not here to discuss the ins and outs of God or which one is right, there's about 5 players in the market. They've been fighting for market leadership for give or take 5,000 years.
Yeah.
We've got evidence of humans documenting this kind of tussle, if you will, or competitiveness that's been existing in the marketplace. The first branded goods were produced around about 4,500 years ago. So
yeah.
The biblical nature of
The Bible.
organized religion
Yeah.
is basically a framework that humans create to invite and encourage other humans to lead better lives. In really simple terms, it's about giving you a sense of purpose. It's about giving you a reason to operate in a certain framework, and that framework affects everything from law to privacy law to VAT. Some religions do not charge interest, for example, on lending. Yeah. It affects our holiday system. It affects our entire calendar. It affects when we're allowed to get married or we're not allowed to get married in certain
what you eat.
What we eat, how we weigh it, how it works. Everything is conditioned by this notion of this biblical belief that we've all created and we will reinforce and we will continue to build upon. And whether we call that a brand or not, it kind of is up to the individual. And whether you believe or don't believe, that again is up to the individual. What's really interesting, I think, within that kind of conversation is we've got some great logos. We've got some wonderful stories. I mean,
good one-liners.
Yeah.
Really good. The fashion is incredible. Yeah. The architecture is brilliant. If you look at this as kind of like a movie, I mean, there's a lot of movies out there too. But if you look at this as like a piece of storytelling, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's what a brand is. It's giving someone, it's giving another human being an ideology that they can work with, that they like, and they think has got value, and they think if they ascribe or subscribe to it, it will better their lives. And I think, to me, that's what a brand is. And I think brands help us as humans grow because it gives us an emotional relationship with something that's quite inanimate, i.e. it's a piece of metal, or it's a piece of wood, or it's a piece of plastic, or it's something that's got little value, but then we give it greater value through the emotional attachment that we have for that object or thing. And it's that emotional attachment that is what I would term the brand. It's this imaginable, this sort of imaginable thing that we surround something with, and it's done in an emotive way. So, you know, a pair of wellies are a pair of wellies, but if I said to you a hunter pair of wellies versus a pair of Dunlop wellies, you're instantly going to think more and higher about those Dunlop wellies, but they're just wellies.
Yeah.
It's a very basic object. It's just a bit of rubber with a kind of buckle on it, but that's not the point. It's hunter wellies, and I will feel good wearing my hunter wellies, and you're not going to take my hunter wellies away from me.
Yeah.
And that emotional attachment, and I think, is so relevant. And I think, unfortunately, you know, we see brands, I think, have been given many sort of teachings would say that brands have only been around for the last couple of hundred years. I don't believe that. I think when you look at, let's say, organized religion, that is a piece of conditioning that we've all subscribed to in some way, shape, or form, and it continues to shape our lives. The unfortunate events that have taken place in Gaza over the last month have really kind of brought that to the fore, that this way of thinking, this model of being, is still something that is very, very emotionally charged and has great potential, and also great potential to do not necessarily good in that process too. So it's got to be managed, and it's got to be worked, and I guess it's got to be used in the right ways. As with any superhero power, you can use it, yeah, in a good way, or you can use it in a bad way. Yeah.
Because I guess that's the thing you find with a lot of the clients that you work with now, is that they're up against, as like some of the companies we mentioned earlier, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, who just have loads of money. They can chuck their advertising down on everybody, whereas there could be a social enterprise or a charity down the road that's helping people locally that just can't be heard because they haven't got the budget to compete, but they have the creativity as the medium to kind of communicate with people and relate to people and get people involved in what you're doing. Has that, sorry, I
was just gonna jump in on that. From what you've just described, you know, like God as a brand or organized religion, and you can think of so many things then, for, you know, like the Roman Empire, all these big names that have been actually around for a long time, and the way you've described stories and the fashion, it's just such the whole thing, the whole sphere around that brand just shows how wide-reaching it is. So for something like what you're saying, like this, you know, the small social enterprise who maybe can't compete on budget, actually what you've said I think is empowering, because you go, let me think of this brand in a much broader context rather than just what I'm paying for, and then you can start really seeing the power of that brand or image or story that you want to tell, and how you can put it in so many different places. Yeah.
And I think purpose is at the heart of it. I mean, our lives, our entire lives, and it's, again, please, I'm a devout atheist, so I'm not selling any religion at this point.
Yeah.
Our entire life is to find purpose. It's to give us a reason to get out of bed every day. It's to give us a reason to look forward to 10, 20 years, or however long we choose. Purpose is what we crave as humans, and that's why we created this thing called organized religion, to explain what our function is in this world and this stratosphere of life, and to give us meaning. So if we take the value of purpose being our ultimate goal within life, then it's quite kind of simple that those with more purpose should gain more reward. And I think it's making sure within our lives we make the right choices so that we choose more purposeful things to reward than unpurposeful things that are not doing it necessarily for a greater gain. That opens up a much bigger conversation as to what we do with our lives, but also what we do with our time, our money. And those are, you know, really key things within our lives, as the most precious thing we will ever own, and the most precious commodity we have in our lives is time. You can be the richest person in the world, but you will die at one day. You will get something, perhaps that's a threat to your life, and unfortunately you will have the same choices and options as someone with no money. But the money thing's kind of to some degree arbitrary, but what's really, really important, I think, is we choose to do what we can, and we choose to add as much purpose as we can within the time frame of our lives to make the most impact that we possibly can. And I guess that's the responsibility of every creative, is to make sure that we try to bring as much purpose in our lives. And within that purpose could be happiness. That purpose could be helping great brands that are doing purposeful things that sell more. It could be growing that community. It could be helping them reach that one person that needs that one interaction on that day that could change their life. And it giving them the confidence and the ability to continue to do that, both from a financial perspective, but also from a motivational perspective, or giving them the creative tools to be able to do that, I guess, is certainly why I'm still doing what I'm doing, and really proud and happy to be doing what we're doing, because it's sharing those skills and that kind of belief in purpose and creativity that, I mean, I'd hope that's what we can do for the rest of our days.
No, that's it's really good. I guess kind of on that, and I think there's about 2 more questions to go through, but like the second last one, I'd love to hear what your general approach to a client is. As in, somebody comes to you, as I mentioned earlier, it could be charity, social enterprise. They're like, look, we're not getting the message out there. We're doing really good stuff. We need to support more people. How do you approach that? As in, what are the conversations like in managing a project to kind of draw out the purpose and the way to, and the benefits of people dealing with the organization, and then articulating that, whether in text or illustratively and on their website? How does that generally work? Like, and how do you do it differently, I guess, compared to other people?
Cool. So everybody's, first of all, couple of steps back, we work with all sorts of clients, both commercial ones as well as what we'd term sort of third sector. All share the same ambition to create change, and hopefully that's positive change in some way, shape or form. The second part is all agencies will claim to do something different, and they'll always claim to, we've got this unique system, it's amazing, you've got to sign up to it. We're all roughly doing the same thing. I think the only difference, and this is the only, and it's a key difference, and it's one difference that we are born with and hopefully we die with, and that's integrity. You're born with integrity, and it's up to you in your lifetime if you lose that or you go to the grave with it. And if you can die with integrity, I think that's a wonderful place. So the one thing I suppose we do that we've consistently done over 9 years is apply integrity to everything that we do. And the integrity begins with that first interaction with that client. So we would always strike an information amnesty as that kickoff meeting. So we all put our concerns and worries and challenges on the table. Both parties, all individuals responsible or stakeholders from those parties, put their concerns on the table. It could be, I'm worried about approval time. It could be, I'm worried about you don't have the capacity to do this. It could be, I'm worried about the technical considerations required here. By doing that, I know exactly what you're worried about, and I know exactly what's troubling you, so I can start helping you understand that, and I can help you can then start overcoming those kind of problems. I also gauge quite quickly how they respond to my challenges and what I worry about in this conversation too. Are you being authentic? Can you validate this? If we really ask you to do this, have you got the numbers to back this up, for example, if we're making this claim? So I know that I'm not essentially lying, and I have a sense of integrity in that conversation, and I hope that gives everybody a sense of integrity. What that does is it sets us all in a really even keel. We've been honest, we've been transparent, and we've been upfront. That's a great working relationship. Honest, transparent, and upfront, because you get to the answer quicker, because you're not scared of saying, no, I kind of like it, I kind of don't. No, it's not really inspiring me. Why? Oh, because X, X, and X. Great, we can solve that. Great, and then it will inspire you. Yeah, great, right, great. So then we can move on quickly. And there's nothing worse than trying to second guess or trying to guess what's in someone's brain. That's the worst game in the world, especially from a creative perspective. And I think of it in the context of, let's say, art. If every artist tried to guess what the gallerist was going to buy, and then what the end customer was going to buy, they would make stuff, and it would. Can you imagine? It would be restricted to the person who's wealthy enough to buy the piece of art from the gallerist's creative capacity, which I would argue is quite limited and quite small, which is why they employ an artist to do that in the process. Yeah. So if this game was guess what's in the client's head, it's a silly and wasted time kind of to even begin that endeavor. So the more you can be upfront with what's needed and what's expected and what's worrying, what's challenging, the neater that working relationship is going to be. I cannot create on my own. I think that's one thing that's really important. I can co-create, and it's through co-creation that we will get to the smartest answers the quickest, because you bring into it your thoughts, experience, and expertise. We bring in our thoughts, experience, and expertise, and together in the middle, we've got a neat solution that none of us could have come up with on our own. I don't know your business as well as you know your business. I don't know the challenges in the market as much as you do. That's your market, it's your business. I can help you do that, but together we have to work.
And how, just on that point, sorry, how is there like a particular little exercise you do to foster that? As in, like, I can see how you go in, like, and the people I've met on the team that you work with, they're all lovely, really nice, friendly. So I can see how very quickly everyone will be very relaxed and kind of open. But how do you foster that idea exchange? Because like Dan and I obviously run MYO together. It's like that's sometimes there can be a conflict. Dan has a totally different opinion to mine, and it doesn't necessarily get to the best answer. Do you have a particular technique on that, or is it just time solves that and just constantly asking why and following up with people's perspectives?
A mixture of the two. I think you have to give people, and this is the hardest thing I think within creativity. Failure is key to creativity. You have to give people space and time to fail, and only through failure can you actually close a door or open another door. And if you don't tackle that door, it's still always a niggling question that sort of sits in your brain as to, is this right or is this wrong? Should we go down this direction or should we go down that direction? So you have to allow people to fail. That's it's sort of as people have got to try things out. Then we present and then we say, what do you think? And they say, no, 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 no. Brilliant. We've got 3 no's. So we're one step closer to a yes. Great. The resilience thing is really important here. But also we know that, the reasons for this no and that no and this no lead us to, so the answer is basically not that, not that, not that. So the answer is going to be either that, or that. Great. Then we can find a solution and we can get to an answer. So I think it's the process is to some degree a process of elimination, but also a process of failure. And then within that, I think it's been brave enough, and I think you mentioned that earlier, that the bravery is what comes out of a positive working relationship, is that you're all confident enough to say, I actually think this, and it's okay to think that. And if I sound like a bit of an idiot, or I don't really understand it, or it's the wrong thing, then I'll admit that too. And I think being brave enough to fail, I think is a key part of a creative process and a creative journey. And if everyone around the table accepts that, then we're not looking at the clock thinking, well, they've failed 3 times, therefore they're out. It's like 3 fails, so therefore they're going to be much closer to the solution and to an outcome. And also it invites people in to contribute to that decision making or the creative process, and then we co-create together, so we get to an outcome that's clearer and more beneficial for everybody, because everyone's got an invested stake in it. So instead of the agency coming and going, ta-da, this is our big idea, well, we shape this idea together, and that gives you a stake in it, gives me a stake in this, and together we'll move forward, and therefore we've got shared ownership of this. So it's a bit kind of like offering equity within an idea, and that equity is hopefully something that motivates more people to take more responsibility for it. So therefore it becomes a bigger idea, it becomes a more celebrated idea, and it's not a them and us scenario. So I think avoiding that them and us scenario is so key in the conversation, because it's so easy to go, well, the agency don't understand me, the agency don't get me, the agency doesn't get our brand. No, you've either presented your brand wrong, or you're making it awkward, or you don't really understand what your brand is, and therefore you're never going to be able to define that, because I can't play guess what's in your brain. And that's the worst game in creativity, is guess what's in your brain. No.
I'm really fascinated by the topic in general, because it's one of those things where you don't know what's right until it's done. Like, you don't know until you've gone through this whole thing, you're constantly tweaking it, and then it's just a moment where the client goes, nailed it, that's it. And then but that conversation could easily be, oh, that's
No,
not it,
that's
you need to
all,
change
yeah.
this. Like it's really cool. Like
Yeah.
you must get such a kick out of that every time that happens when you work with a client and that moment's reached after lots of dialogue and collaborating, as you're saying, and then it's like, poof, we've nailed it. We've created something that didn't exist a month ago, 6 months ago, and it could transform what this organization does. Like that must never get old, even 9 years in, does it?
No, I think, like we said, the rush, and when you get results and someone phones you up or you get an email saying, what you just did here, we smashed our target. We thought we were going to get this and we ended up with that. And it's thanks to that difference that we can now do this and we can now do that. And it's knowing that your value that you've added in that process has created new things and new possibilities. And again, it's kind of like an energy flow. You give someone creative understanding or a key to unlock some degree of creativity, they will unlock something else, and that will unlock something else and unlock something else. So you're constantly surrounded by innovation and pioneering people, and you're encouraging people to be brave, take risks, fail, move on, grow. Very similar to what you guys do, which is all about empowering people to make their own decisions and their own thinking through the process of making your own creativity. But by doing that, they've got ownership and invested interest in this, and they can then take this on in ways which you could never imagine, and you're happy for that because you want things to happen in ways that you never imagined, because that's the process of creativity.
Yeah, it's just starting it, and as you said, unlocking to then unlock the chain of unlocking the potential. Gosh, this has been a journey. I think I'm going to finish with 2 questions. I'm going to go back to your favorite. I think I really want to know, what brands have you just seen and gone, oh, I love what they're doing? And then what books can you recommend on creativity for people to read and just absolutely absorb that have had an impact on you?
Cool. 2 parts. First of all, brands. I think any brand that stays true to itself, I'm always impressed with, because it's hard to stay true to yourself. Essentially, we're talking about integrity.
Yeah.
A brand with purpose that actually says what it sets out and announces to the world what it's going to do and actually delivers on that consistently, time and time again, will always sit well with me. And it's always you have great admiration and great praise for someone who says they will do something, does it, and does it again and again and again. And I think that's human nature, but it's kind of reflected in brands. So the obvious ones would be, your Patagonias. I've always had a soft spot for Patagonia. I read
Sam.
Let My People Go Surfing book is very good.
That's got to be on everybody's top 10 list. It's more about life than it is about building a brand. And I think on the back of that, I did start fly fishing. So which is this wonderful sort of serene sort of practice. But I definitely think any brand that's kind of doing what they believe, and I think any brand that's prepared to get involved in something and take a risk, and if it doesn't go right, admit that failure and to move on. So I think probably Patagonia is the neatest of all the brands, but and there are many others, sort of Elvis and Krauss. I was looking at only yesterday that they would come up in I watched a little webinar yesterday.
The fire hose.
And the 50% of profits go back into those that are rescue services or emergency services. It's kind of such a circular scenario. The beautiful thing, and the way they've just kept chipping away at this, and it's just great, and it's really sort of beautiful to see unfold. So I think the worst, I think it's probably easy to say the brands I dislike are brands that have no purpose, that have no integrity, that are kind of unscrupulous. And I think we've looked at this, I guess, in this conversation today through human lens, through the lens of human eyes. It's just the same as any relationship you have with anybody. If they're a bit of a bullshitter, or they kind of use you and you don't feel good, or that relationship is not positive, or it's not one that you feel comfortable in, you don't like that individual. And I think that goes for the brands as well. It's kind of, it is very much a human relationship, because it's all about emotions, and it's all about an emotive response or relationship you have with this thing that's wood or plastic or metal, or it's got keyboards on it, or I don't know.
Are there any that stand out that you can say that you really dislike?
Yeah, or even on that question, is there one that was good and then they just really messed up?
Oh, they messed up.
Because I know you mentioned the point about consistency, and that is such an important thing. It breeds trust. People like even posting things at certain times. People see it come out at a certain time of the week, and it just builds a rapport and a trust in the consistency. But is there anyone that's just totally, it's like, what the hell did they do? They were doing great, and then they totally flipped. And
I mean, that list is long. I don't want it sort of be negative.
That is fair.
I think the one that springs to mind is an individual brand, and that for me, and this is on a personal level, is Lance Armstrong. I don't know how he lives. I don't know what purpose he puts in front of his life to get him out of bed in the morning. Primarily because I was duped. I think the whole world was duped.
Yeah.
And he ruined so many lives in the process, basically trying to proclaim his innocence at the cost of others' lives. It's an extreme sense of unpurposeful ambition that overtook an individual to a point where they would be prepared to sacrifice other people's well-being, life, careers to gain their own. And I think that's probably that's certainly one that stood out when you said that. And there are so many brands that have disappointed over the years, and there are so many brands that are just not true to themselves, or I guess to their shareholders. But the notion of I guess a corporation is something that kind of worries me too. There was a very famous documentary called The Corporation, and they compared a corporation to a shark. One day it'll swim by you, the next day it will eat you. And it's this kind of psychopathic relationship with that kind of corporation that is quite alarming, and it's something that is also quite unknown, and it depends who the CEO is, and it depends what the direction of the business is. And there's nothing worse when being in or surrounded or experiencing those corporate scenarios. Really simple things like this call may be recorded. Well, it is being recorded. It's a fact. It will be using evidence against you if this goes legal. Don't say may be recorded. I really like you, but the business thinks your position's not quite right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you're firing me? No. The business wants to direction. So hang on, who's firing me here? The business or the company or the corporation? And then it gets really muggy. And so this whole kind of it's very easy, I think, within many corporations to kind of get lost, and the key question is within that, did that corporation ever have a purpose that was greater than a shareholder sort of profit scenario? I don't know, and I can't really speak.
I
guess now it's like you can't get away with that stuff as much anymore. Like you must really appreciate that in the last 10 years particularly. It seems that
the human element.
There's information's out there. People are everyone is on a pedestal almost, and kind of if you're doing bad stuff, at least it's talked about more. Not saying that it's making as much change as it could, but it's getting there, I think.
I don't necessarily want to challenge it. I just say I don't believe that. I really would. And this is a personal kind of scenario. I mean, unfortunately, humans are not great. And I'll just close. And this is not a negative dwell. And
the podcast is over.
Humans are not great. So give or take 5,000 years ago, we set out some really basic rules. We'll be nice to each other. Salvation, hope. We'll open our doors. We'll welcome people in. We'll open our borders. We'll be really nice and inviting to people. We won't do stuff to children. We'll be kind. We try not to do stuff to each other's partners, etc. We kind of failed. 5,000 years later, we're still doing that, right? So to think that we as humans have kind of changed, and we've kind of, we've gotten good, and we don't need those 10 commandments because we've solved those 10 commandments, ain't true. Sorry, folk. So although we might think things have changed, and yes, technology and communication have allowed us to understand more of these things, Unfortunately, these things still exist. And a great one yesterday, I was really surprised yesterday. It was a bad day in business. You have to go pay your corporation tax, and you got to log into HMRC's thing, and it says, "Are you a small business owner? Click here to pay." It says, "Are you a large corporation? Click here to pay." That there is two divisions, right? So clearly, if you go down, obviously the small business and you pay your corporation tax, as does everybody else. And you're kind of giving away money for making profit, and you're kind of being penalized for making profit. But then the other path is you can choose to click on the other button, which I'm guessing goes through to somewhere else, which means you get maybe an account manager, you can negotiate, you can work out how we're going to pay. So that 20% levy that we are hit with is not something that they necessarily are hit with. So I'd be very curious to understand how this works. And I still unfortunately think there is a tiered system where those powerful enough to control the conversation will control the conversation. And unfortunately, those not powerful enough will be the victims of that conversation in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
That's not to bring it down on this conversation.
No, gosh.
It was so hopeful for so long.
I know
what you mean.
It's true. I find it interesting actually how you just talked about humanity as a brand. You know, we set up our values 5,000 years ago, and we're still trying to live by them. Right. That's very interesting. And
there's so much now around, because part of the podcast is about well-being, which we haven't touched on tons, but is like a lot of the things now talked about to like take care of yourself is going back to things 5,000-6,000 years ago. It's like put your phone away, like going back to like Roman emperors and things that they did, and it's so interesting that it's like, okay, we need to just reset again. Let's go back 5,000 years and give it another shot. Forget about all the progress.
And on the book and